My mom laughed across the Thanksgiving table. "You'll never own a house like your sister." Victoria smirked, twisting the knife. "She'll be broke forever." The mashed potatoes on my plate tasted like ash. I wanted to scream, defend myself, remind them of everything I'd achieved. But I didn't. I just smiled, silently, because deep down I knew something they didn't. That night, I stopped being the child desperate for approval. I started becoming the woman who would change everything. My name is Enriette. I'm 26 years old. And this is the story of how I went from family disappointment to standing in a driveway that belonged to me. A home more beautiful than anything they could imagine. If you've ever been compared, dismissed, or underestimated, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments if this story feels familiar. And don't forget, subscribe, because what came next will shock you. I grew up as the youngest of 2 daughters. Victoria was older by 3 years, and from the beginning, she was the golden child. She was beautiful, poised, and effortlessly charming. Top of her class, Ivy League scholarship, a 6-figure job right after college. She became the walking resume my mother bragged about to neighbors and relatives. Me? I was the artsy one, the dreamer, the girl who loved sketchbooks more than spreadsheets. I chose a state school with a strong design program, not an Ivy with prestige. I took a modest job at a small creative agency after graduation. The pay wasn't huge, but I loved the work. In my mother's eyes, though, I had already failed at life by 22. Every choice I made was compared against Victoria's shining example. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" That was the soundtrack of my childhood. When Victoria bought her first house at 26, a perfect suburban home with her lawyer fiancé, Brandon, my mother practically floated with pride. I was 23 then, still sharing a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. Proud of my independence, proud of building something on my own. But to my mother, that pride meant nothing. To her, I was the daughter who couldn't get her life together. The comparisons never stopped. At family gatherings, Victoria's accomplishments were recited like a trophy list, while my work was reduced to her little art projects. Each word chipped away at me. Every smirk from Victoria, every sigh from my mother, reminded me I was the shadow in a house that only had room for 1 star. By the time I turned 25, I'd learned to brace myself before walking into any family dinner. It wasn't food that filled me. It was the familiar taste of disappointment. And then came Thanksgiving, the day their words cut deep enough to change me forever. That Thanksgiving dinner should have broken me, but it did something else. When my mother told me I'd never own a home, and Victoria smirked like she'd already won life, something inside me snapped. Not into pieces, but into focus. I didn't argue that night. I didn't beg for recognition. I smiled, finished my potatoes, and quietly decided I would stop living for their approval. I would live for me. The drive home was long and quiet. Tears blurred the highway lights, but they weren't tears of defeat. They were release. The release of years spent chasing validation I'd never receive. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at the folder I'd been too afraid to treat seriously. My freelance work, logos I'd designed, websites I'd built, brand packages that had quietly fueled my passion. 2 years of late nights and weekend projects, hidden under the label of extra cash. For the first time, I asked myself, what if this wasn't extra? What if this was the beginning of something real? Within a week, I filed the paperwork for an LLC. I bought a domain name. I built a sleek website showcasing my best work. I reached out to old contacts. I joined online communities. I marketed myself as a branding specialist for startups, and the response stunned me. I'd been undercharging for years. When I raised my rates, clients still came. In fact, they respected me more. Within 3 months, my freelance income outpaced my agency salary. By the 6th month, I walked into my boss's office, resignation letter in hand. It felt terrifying. It felt exhilarating. It felt like freedom. But the transition wasn't easy. There were nights when my eyes burned from staring at a screen, when I fought exhaustion with coffee, sketching logo drafts at 2 a.m. under the glow of a desk lamp. There were mornings when anxiety clawed at me, whispering that I'd made a huge mistake, that maybe my mother was right, and I was just chasing a dream too fragile to last. And yet, every finished project reminded me otherwise. Every satisfied client email felt like proof. Proof that I was capable. Proof that my path had value. I didn't tell my family. What was the point? They'd already written me off as a failure. Why waste my breath trying to convince them otherwise? Instead, I focused on building. I hired a virtual assistant, then a junior designer. My business began to scale, faster than I ever imagined. But the best part wasn't the money. It was waking up excited, choosing my clients, setting my own boundaries. For the first time in my life, I was steering my own ship, and I didn't care if my family ever noticed. Because deep down, I knew one day they would. And when that day came, it wouldn't be me knocking on their door. It would be them standing at mine. It had been nearly a year since that Thanksgiving dinner. In that time, my business had grown, my savings had grown, and most importantly, I had grown. I had something to show for it. A Victorian house in Millbrook Heights. The kind of neighborhood my mother had always dreamed of, but never reached. I hadn't told them. Not a word. The house was mine, my sanctuary, my proof. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Henriette," she said, her tone sharp. "Victoria told me you've been telling people you bought a house. Is this some kind of joke?" I froze. How did she know? But my voice stayed steady. "It's not a joke, I did." Silence stretched on the line. Finally, she scoffed. "That's impossible. Those houses cost a fortune. There's no way you could afford one. Are you lying to make yourself feel better?" Her words cut, but I didn't flinch. "I'm not lying. I bought a home in Millbrook Heights." Another silence. Then her demand. "Prove it. Give me the address." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep my sanctuary private, but another part, the stronger part, was done hiding. I gave her the address. "We'll be there in an hour," she snapped. She hung up before I could answer. My heart pounded. I paced through my house, touching the carved banister, the stained glass. The kitchen I had renovated with my own money. This was mine. Why was I still preparing to prove myself to them? The doorbell never rang. Instead, my phone lit up with messages. From my mother, from Victoria. "Henriette, we're outside, open the door." "This is ridiculous, let us in." "Stop being childish. We drove all the way here." I stepped onto the porch, mug of tea in my hand, and saw them standing at the edge of my driveway. Two women who had spent years tearing me down, now staring at the house I built without them. My phone buzzed again. Another demand. Another insult hidden as concern. I typed 4 words into the family group chat. 4 words that carried all the weight of my journey. "Get off my property." The buzzing stopped. The calls ended. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the powerless daughter. I was the one with boundaries. And the shock on their faces, even from across the street, told me they finally understood. I didn't need them to validate my worth. The next morning, my father called. His voice was weary, heavy with disappointment. "Your mother is upset," he said. "She says you were disrespectful. Why didn't you just let us in?" I closed my eyes. Years of silence from him echoed louder than his words now. "Dad," I said slowly, "did you ever once tell Mom to stop comparing me to Victoria? Did you ever defend me when she laughed at my career? When she told me I'd never be enough?" The silence on the line was deafening. That silence was my answer. "You wanted peace in the family," I whispered. "So you let them destroy me to keep it. And now you want me to fold again? To keep the peace that only ever protected them." He sighed, the sound of a man cornered. "I love you," he said weakly, "but I don't know how to fix this." "It's not your job to fix it," I replied. "It's their job to admit what they did. Until then, there's nothing to fix." I hung up before he could respond. For days, the house was quiet. No more calls, no more demands. I worked in peace, designing brands for clients who actually valued me. Then an email appeared. From Victoria. It began with 3 words I never expected. "I'm sorry, Henriette." I read carefully, suspicious. But her tone was different. She admitted the truth. That she'd mocked me to feel superior. That she envied my courage to follow passion. Her marriage was crumbling. Her career empty. She confessed she'd been jealous all along. It was an apology without excuses. For once, my sister dropped the smirk. I didn't answer right away. I let her words sit, testing if they carried real weight. A week later, another message came. This time from my mother. "Henriette," she wrote, "I see now my methods were harsh. I thought I was pushing you to succeed, but instead I hurt you. I'm proud of you, even if I struggled to show it." I stared at the email, the screen glowing in the dark. For years, I had begged for these words. Now they felt almost foreign, like hearing a language I'd once forgotten. I crafted careful replies. To Victoria, I said, "Thank you. I'm not ready for closeness, but maybe we can start small. Coffee. Just us." To my mother, I wrote, "I need more than words. I need respect, not comparisons. If you can give me that, we can rebuild slowly." For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for their approval. I was setting the terms. And the power shift was undeniable. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the one deciding who got access to me. 6 months passed after that day in my driveway. The house that once felt like defiance now felt like home. Victoria and I began to rebuild carefully. Coffee dates, quiet conversations, moments where we weren't rivals, but sisters learning each other all over again. My mother moved slower. Therapy, apologies, awkward attempts at kindness. Some days I believed her effort. Other days I doubted it. But either way, I stayed in control. Because now I understood. Their approval wasn't the prize. My peace was. My boundaries were. The life I had built was. On my 27th birthday, I sat in the turret office I had designed for myself. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, coloring the room in shades of gold and rose. I thought of the girl I used to be, sitting at family dinners, swallowing criticism with mashed potatoes, waiting for someone to tell her she was enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who didn't need applause to feel accomplished. A woman who had learned that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't proving people wrong, it's proving yourself right. I built this house. I built this business. I built this life. And most importantly, I built myself. If you've ever been told you'll never measure up, if you've ever been dismissed, compared, or underestimated, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not defined by their vision of you. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to create a future. They never believed you could. Because at the end of the day, owning your worth is the most unshakable property you'll ever have. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family expectations? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading it. And if this story resonates, subscribe for more journeys of resilience.
I wasn't expecting anything that morning. The coffee was watery, my socks didn't match, and the rain hadn't stopped since before dawn. I was halfway through a cup of store-brand yogurt when my phone buzzed across the counter. Unknown number. Usually that meant debt collector's political spam, or someone trying to sell me a new internet plan I couldn't afford. I nearly let it ring out. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe just a lack of anything better, made me answer on the fourth ring. "Is this Lucy Whitman?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Speaking. "This is Margaret Ellis. I'm an attorney with Ellis and Kleinman. I'm calling on behalf of the estate of Mrs. Estelle Whitman." My hand froze around the spoon. My grandmother, yes, ma'am. I stood still for a beat too long. My back touched the cold edge of the fridge behind me. She passed away 6 months ago. That's correct. I wasn't told about the funeral. I didn't mean for it to come out sharp. But it did. Margaret hesitated. "I understand. Mrs. Whitman left instructions for me to contact you directly. There are some personal matters I need to discuss with you in person. My stepmother said it was private, that the funeral was only for family." The last word burned more than I expected it to. Margaret's voice was softer now. "Are you available this afternoon?" That's how I found myself 3 hours later, sitting in a leather chair that squeaked every time I shifted. The law office was nicer than I expected. Mahogany shelves, real paintings on the wall, and one of those ticking clocks that made you hear your own thoughts too clearly. Margaret Ellis looked to be in her late 50s. She had silver-streaked hair pulled into a twist, a navy blue pantsuit, and a wedding band so thin it looked more like memory than metal. She slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Before we talk about the estate, Mrs. Whitman left this for you." Inside was a leather-bound notebook worn at the edges, the kind that looked like it had been touched every day. A ribbon marked a page in the middle. Margaret didn't speak. She just nodded for me to open it. The first page wasn't dramatic. It just had a date from nearly 2 decades ago and a short note in cursive so careful it made my throat tighten. "She's walking now. Carol says she's clumsy, but I think Lucy moves like Rebecca, quick and full of purpose." I blinked at the ink. The next few pages were filled with more observations, little notes, records of holidays where gifts were returned, birthdays, missed phone calls never answered. And then, on a page by itself, one sentence, underlined twice. "Rebecca didn't leave her. They lied." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The buzz of the light overhead felt too loud. My grandmother had written in this journal for 20 years. I hadn't heard from her in 10. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. But inside that room, something cracked open, not loud, not angry, just the soft sound of a truth that had waited too long to be heard. I turned another page. The entry was dated December 23, 2006. I would have been 7. Dropped off a wrapped dollhouse at Ray's house. Carol answered the door, said Lucy was sick. I saw her through the window. She looked fine, sitting at the kitchen table coloring. Carol closed the blinds. My stomach knotted. I didn't remember that day, but I remembered that dollhouse. Not getting it, just hearing about it years later from a girl at school who had one just like it. I remember wishing hard that someone thought I deserved something that nice. Page after page, my grandmother had documented a war waged in silence. Missed birthdays, returned gifts, letters unopened. Then, around the time I turned 11, the entries changed. They moved to Cincinnati. No forwarding address. Derek mentioned it online. I wasn't told. Carol called me nosy. Told me to stop sending things. Ray never returned my messages. Each note was written with calm precision. No dramatics, no bitterness. Just the truth marked down like a woman trying to hold on to something before it vanished. When I looked up, Margaret was watching me, gently, hands folded. She kept that journal locked away, she said. Along with this. From her drawer, she pulled out a small envelope yellowed at the edges. It had my name written in sharp handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a hospital birth record. My mother's name, Rebecca Whitman. Not Rebecca Thompson. Not any alias Carol once mentioned. Not some girl who ran off with a man from Tennessee as the story always went. No. My mother hadn't left. She had died giving birth to me. The room didn't spin. It just sort of tipped, like I was standing on a floor that had always been crooked and I was only now seeing the angle. My mother died, I asked. Margaret nodded. From complications post-labor. Estelle was there. She held you before the nurses did. And my father. Your father remarried Carol within 10 months. Estelle tried to gain custody or at least shared visitation. But Ray insisted on starting a fresh chapter. Fresh chapter. That's what Carol always said when she redecorated. Or when she changed the Christmas ornaments from red to gold, said we didn't need old colors tied to old people. I had been an old color. Margaret stood and crossed to a nearby cabinet. She returned with another document, a legal copy of Estelle's will. She never changed this, even when she couldn't reach you anymore. I scanned it with trembling fingers. My name appeared 3 times, once for the house, once for the retirement accounts, and once for the phrase, "To my granddaughter Lucy Whitman, I leave everything," because blood is not the only bond, but truth, once buried, must be passed on. I closed the file and sat back. For most of my life, I'd been told my mother didn't want me, that she left, that I was lucky Carol raised me, fed me, made sure I had clothes that fit, that I owed them everything even when they made me feel like I was nothing. And here in a journal and a folder was the truth: I wasn't unwanted. I was erased. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper. It tapped against the window like someone trying to get in. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. But something in me folded that day quietly, like a paper map revealing a direction I never knew had been there all along. The key was tucked into a slim envelope taped inside the back cover of the journal. It had a tag on it handwritten in blue ink: front door. Use the side entry lock sticks. Margaret offered to drive me there that same afternoon. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. A few houses got new siding. One lawn was now xeriscaped, but the mailbox still said Whitman painted in faded white script. "I thought the house was sold," I said as we pulled up. "It never was," Margaret replied. "Your grandmother kept it, maintained it, paid the property taxes in full every year, said she wanted it to be waiting for the right person. The key stuck in the lock, just like she said. I had to wiggle it twice before the door creaked open. The scent hit me first, not musty, not forgotten, just quiet. Cedar oil, lemon polish, and something floral that reminded me of a church coat closet in spring. The living room still had a rotary phone on the side table and an Afghan folded over the back of a green couch. Sunlight poured through lace curtains, catching dust motes that looked like they were mid-conversation. I walked through slowly, like I was being reintroduced to a memory I hadn't earned yet. On the wall near the hallway was a framed photo, a woman holding a newborn wrapped in a knitted blanket. Her eyes were tired, her hair messy, but she was smiling. I didn't need to ask who it was. I had her nose. She decorated very little after your mother passed, Margaret said softly behind me, but she refused to move out. I nodded. In the kitchen, a note was taped to the fridge. The garden still gets good sun in the mornings. Tomatoes did best in June. I opened drawers one by one. In a tin by the sink were receipts for plumbing work, a birthday card never mailed addressed to me, and 2 sets of keys labeled shed and basement. I don't understand, I said finally. Why did they all think they were getting this? Margaret set down her briefcase on the table. Because she let them believe it. Carol asked for the house to be appraised last fall. Estelle allowed it. Ray mentioned liquidating assets. Estelle told him she was working on it. They thought she was giving it to them. They spent money based on that assumption, Margaret said. Derek bought a new car. Carol remodeled their master bathroom. Ray, he took out a line of credit against expected inheritance. I leaned against the counter, trying to breathe past the weight pressing on my chest. They were already spending what they thought was mine, I said. Margaret didn't respond. The kitchen was warm, not just temperature, something else. Like a place built for care, not convenience. I could still see my grandmother in it, moving carefully boiling water, humming something she never quite finished. They had all passed through this house thinking they could own it, but they never really saw it. And now, without even knowing what I'd do next, I realized this was the first place I had ever walked into that didn't feel borrowed. The reading was scheduled for Thursday at 4:30 p.m., just as Estelle had instructed. Late afternoon, Margaret said so everyone would have time to make themselves presentable. I arrived 5 minutes early. Carol was already there, sitting in the waiting area like it was a nail salon, heels crossed, makeup, perfect gold earrings catching the light. She greeted me with a tight smile. No warmth. You came, she said. I nodded. So did you. Ray showed up next, followed by Derek, who looked uncomfortable in a button-down he'd clearly borrowed. They spoke to Margaret like old friends, cheerful and sure. Nobody asked why I was there. We were led into a private conference room, long mahogany table, soft chairs, water glasses already poured. Margaret took her place at the head. Thank you all for coming. She began, hands folded over the folder in front of her. As you know, Mrs. Estelle Whitman left behind a will dated 12 years ago, reaffirmed and notarized as recently as last spring. Carol smiled. She was always meticulous. Yes, Margaret agreed. She was. She opened the folder and began reading. It started with a few formalities, then a pause. To my granddaughter, Lucy Whitman. Margaret read, her voice steady. I leave the house at 312 Halford Street along with all its contents, including the safe deposit key. I leave to her the entirety of my retirement accounts and personal savings totaling $1.1 million at time of writing. I leave these not out of sentiment, but out of truth. There was a silence so complete I could hear Derek shift in his seat. Carol laughed once, low and sharp. That can't be right. Ray cleared his throat. I think you've misread something. Estelle told us the assets would be split equally. Margaret flipped a page. Mrs. Whitman instructed me to inform you all in person and to present her reasoning documented in her own words. She passed me the journal. I opened it to the flagged page. My hands didn't shake. I'd already read it a dozen times. Rebecca didn't leave her. They lied. Ray sat back. What is this? Margaret continued. Lucy's mother, Rebecca Whitman, passed away in childbirth. Carol perpetuated a different story for years, one Mrs. Whitman objected to repeatedly. Carol's voice rose. We raised her, fed her, paid for her school. I was the one who stayed up with her when she had strep at 9. You raised her to believe her mother abandoned her, I said. You let me think I was lucky you didn't throw me out. Ray rubbed his forehead. Derek looked at the journal like it was something contagious. She was unstable, Carol snapped, always interfering. She couldn't accept we were a real family. She wasn't interfering, I said. She was trying to reach me. You made sure she couldn't. Margaret placed one final document on the table. If you wish to contest the will, you may. However, please note that Mrs. Whitman had 2 separate competency evaluations on file and 3 witnesses present during the signing. The will is ironclad. Ray slumped in his seat. Carol said nothing. Derek finally spoke. Wait, there's nothing left. You received a college fund that was transferred to your name when you turned 18, Margaret replied. That was all she set aside for you. Carol turned to me, voice almost a whisper. You're really taking everything I'm taking what's mine, I said. What you never meant for me to have. Not just the money, the truth. No one moved. Margaret gathered her papers and nodded toward the door. I stood. At the threshold, I turned back just once. Carol's eyes met mine wide, uncertain for the first time in my life. I'm not coming back, I said, and I don't need you to understand why. I didn't hear from them for 4 days. Then the first message came. A voicemail from Ray, hesitant, his voice lower than I remembered. We never wanted things to be like this, he said. Carol, she's not herself lately. Maybe we could talk. I didn't return the call. The next day, a text from Carol. Can we start over? I know we've made mistakes. She never used the word sorry. I kept thinking about what she said at the reading. We raised her, as if feeding someone and folding their laundry gave you a clean conscience. They raised me, yes. But they also erased my mother, rewrote her story, and turned me into someone grateful for scraps. That's not parenting, that's ownership. Margaret called to confirm the transfer of property and accounts had gone through. I asked about contesting again. She said they hadn't filed anything. They won't, she added. They'd have to show their hands. On Friday, Derek showed up at my building. He waited by the entrance like a kid outside detention. Lucy, he said when I stepped off the bus. I didn't know. About your mom. About all of it. I looked at him, this boy who'd gotten a new car at 16 who'd laughed when Carol called me her charity case. I believe you didn't know, I said. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something more, but nothing came. Good night, Derek. When I got upstairs, I pulled the journal back out. I flipped to a page I hadn't noticed before, one dated just a few months before Estelle passed. If she ever finds her way home, I hope it feels like hers. No revenge, no anger. Just a quiet wish. They wanted a legacy. They spent money before it existed, certain they were the center of her world. But she gave it to me not out of spite, but because she remembered who I was, even when I'd forgotten. The house didn't need defending. The truth already lived there. I moved into the house on Halford Street in early spring. The daffodils Estelle had planted decades ago still came up in neat little rows along the back fence. Some of the shutters needed repainting, and the water heater wheezed like it held grudges, but the bones of the place were strong. Just like she'd been. At first, I kept everything where it was. Her slippers by the side door, her teacups stacked in pairs. It felt wrong to touch anything. But after a few weeks, I started to fold myself in, hung my coat by the entry-brewed coffee in the same chipped kettle. One morning, while clearing a cabinet in the den, I found an old voice recorder tucked beneath a stack of checkbooks. I pressed play without thinking. It was Rebecca. She was singing. Just a short lullaby. Her voice was thin, but clear, the kind of voice that didn't know it was being recorded. I sat on the carpet, knees to chest, and listened to her sing to me for the first time. She hadn't left. I had simply never been told she was there. I graduated from nursing school that June. Margaret came to the ceremony and handed me a small bouquet wrapped in butcher paper. From someone who'd be very proud of you, she said. With the inheritance invested, I didn't need to work, but I wanted to. I took a position at the same community clinic I'd once called my stepping stone. The pay wasn't much, but the work meant something. In the fall, I started a scholarship fund in my mother's name, the Rebecca Whitman Foundation for Girls Raised Without Their Mothers. A few applications came in. Most were handwritten, some misspelled. All of them broke my heart. In November, Ray called again. We're upside down on the house, he said. We thought things would go differently. Maybe if you could help us bridge the gap. I can't help you, Dad, I said. But if you want to speak with someone, contact Margaret. He hung up without saying goodbye. Carol started sending Christmas cards. Each year they came in red envelopes with glossy lettering. Hope we can heal. Families find their way back. One had a photo of her and Derek in matching flannel pajamas. I didn't open them. I didn't throw them away either. I just kept them in a shoebox in the basement where things went when they no longer needed light. Derek emailed once, said he was sorry. Said he missed the version of us that played video games in the basement before Carol told him we weren't really the same. I wrote back only one line. We didn't grow up in the same family, Derek. We just lived at the same address. Then I signed off and let the silence settle. It felt good not to carry anything anymore, not even the anger. Some afternoons I sit in the back garden with a journal open on my lap and a cup of tea cooling beside me. The tomatoes didn't take that year, but the lavender came back strong, bending under its own weight. There's a photo in the hallway now, framed simple, of Rebecca holding me newborn and swaddled in a knitted yellow blanket. Her eyes are tired, but her smile is sure. I pass by it every morning. I don't pray to it, don't talk to it. I just see it, and I'm seen. One afternoon I went through the last pages of the journal again. The handwriting had grown shakier, but the voice never did. If Lucy ever reads this, I hope she forgives herself for believing what they told her. Tell her I was never angry. Just sorry. There are no answers in that book, just clarity. Like someone turned on a lamp in a room I didn't know I'd been living in my whole life. I don't tell people the whole story. When neighbors ask where I came from or how I got the house, I just say, it belonged to my grandmother. She saved it for me. And that's enough. Some nights when the air shifts just right through the screen door, I hear the house creak like it remembers her footsteps. Like it knows I came back even if I didn't know I was returning. She didn't leave me a fortune. She left me truth. And the truth, quiet, stubborn, and waiting, is worth more than anything else I've ever been told I didn't deserve. I don't plan to leave. And if someday someone knocks on this door looking for who I was, who I am, I'll point to the photo in the hall and the garden out back and say, she never left. Alara had just fallen asleep on my chest when my phone buzzed on the side table. I shifted slightly, careful not to wake her. The screen lit up with a message from Mom. I expected something bland and performative, maybe a reminder about the formula or a link to some European parenting article she thought I should consider. But instead, it was 6 words that split my world in two. We're moving to Barcelona. I emptied the account. Good luck. I didn't move. Not for a full minute. My body went numb before my brain caught up. I opened the banking app and stared at the balance on the shared family fund, 0.20 hours. The same account we'd all contributed to Mom, Dad, and me for emergencies, shared care Bryony's recovery. They took every cent, not a forwarding number, not even a postscript. My breath hitched shallow and tight. Alara stirred her tiny fingers curling near my collarbone. She was warm, trusting, and utterly unaware that 2 people she'd never remember had just made a decision that would shape her entire life. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "Thanks for the heads up." They hadn't even waited for the weekend to end. I was supposed to watch her while Bryony rested after her supposed breakdown in Berlin. No one said how long the arrangement was, or that it came with a disappearing act and financial sabotage. But then again, nothing with them ever came labeled clearly. I laid Alara gently into the portable bassinet, her breath steady, her cheeks still pink with sleep. Then I stood and walked to the kitchen where I kept the paper files, the ones Mom always mocked me for printing. I pulled out the last bank statement. It had shown over $18,000 2 weeks ago. I tried calling them, of course. Straight to voicemail. I texted Bryony. Read no reply. My chest ached, not from panic, but from something heavier recognition. Of course they'd do this. Of course I was the one they'd leave holding the child, the debt, the silence. The fridge buzzed softly behind me as I leaned against the counter and looked around. Bottles, diapers, her pink sleep sack still warm in the laundry basket. Everything that belonged to someone else, now mine, by default. By morning, I'd begin sorting out Alara's schedule and look into legal guardianship. But for now, I just sat beside her and watched her sleep, the enormity of it all pressing against my ribs. Because deep down, I already knew they weren't coming back. Not for her, and not for me. The thing is, I shouldn't have been surprised. Being the reliable one starts so quietly, you don't even notice the leash forming. It's picking up Bryony from ballet because Mom is on a deadline even though I had a club meeting. It's folding Dad's shirts because Bryony gets distracted, and then watching her distraction turn into reward. I used to think I was being helpful. That being dependable made me valuable. But dependable turned into invisible. Bryony was all fire and drama tears in parking lots, poems left on napkins, a dozen half-finished majors before she settled on spiritual anthropology. People adored her because she was messy and luminous and impossible to hold accountable. My parents loved her like she was rare crystal even when she shattered everything in sight. Me, I was the shelf. They called the family fund a shared net. Contributions from Mom's side hustle Dad's lecture stipends my freelance gigs. It started after Bryony's second hospital stay, just in case someone else needed support. I remember that exact phrasing, someone else. Not Bryony, not again. Someone else. But I was never someone else. I was the backup system. The first time Bryony drained the account, it was for a retreat in the Catskills. Transformative, she called it. The second time, it was a failed move to Los Angeles to write a memoir she never started. They told me I shouldn't be so rigid about money, that Bryony was trying to become. Meanwhile, I patched gaps in my car insurance and skipped new glasses for 2 years. Now here we were. They'd left me with her daughter, emptied the account, and moved to Barcelona like it was an overdue sabbatical. The silence after that text wasn't just cruelty, it was clarity. They'd never intended to come back, not to help, not to answer, not even to check. I sat on the couch, the room dim around me, Alara softly cooing in her sleep. I remembered the last time my mother had visited this apartment. She'd frowned at my chipped mug and said, "You still don't have matching dishes." She didn't comment on the handmade tiles I'd installed in the bathroom or the framed photos I'd restored for the Historical Society. Just the dishes. Of course she left without saying goodbye. That's who she always was. That's who they all were. I was the quiet daughter, the stable one. And stable people don't need warning. But Alara would. She would need more than they ever gave. And I was the only one left to figure out how to give it. By day 4, my body had learned to function in 2-hour fragments. Ilara's sleep patterns were an unpredictable math problem. 3 naps of 40 minutes, or 1 long cry from 2 to 4 in the morning. Her lungs were impressive. My nerves were sanded down. I worked in flashes editing footnotes for a regional history journal while she napped on a folded towel beside my laptop. The client had emailed twice about the deadline. I lied and said the delay was due to a family emergency, which felt absurdly mild. Every bottle was a negotiation. Every diaper a scramble. I bounced her until my arms ached, then rocked her with podcasts in my earbuds just to stay awake. There were moments, short ones, where she'd smile at me, gums showing, and it felt like oxygen. Then she'd scream again, and I'd feel like I was vanishing into the wallpaper. Friends sent check-ins, texts, a meme here or there. Nobody showed up. I called Bryony twice, left 1 voicemail. I even typed out a 3rd message asking her point blank when she was coming back. I didn't send it. What was the point? On Thursday morning, after a night of pacing the floor with Alara strapped to my chest while she screamed into my collarbone, I opened the door to get the mail and found a small Tupperware on the stoop. Still warm. A note written in tiny cursive, "You're doing more than enough." A. I looked across the hall. Mrs. Arliss's curtains twitched just slightly. She was retired, lived alone, read mystery novels with the windows open. We'd only spoken once before about trash pickup. Later that afternoon, she knocked once lightly and handed me a folded quilt. "I made it for the wrong-sized bed," she said, voice, even as if this were a business transaction. I thanked her. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't stay. It was the first time someone saw me in days. That night, I sat in the glow of the kitchen light holding Alara with one hand and spooning reheated stew with the other. My arms were tired, my chest heavier than hunger could explain. But for the first time all week, I didn't feel entirely alone. The next morning, I went looking for the old folder where my parents kept legal documents. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house since the day they left. It still smelled like lemon wood polish and overconfidence. I told myself I was just there to grab the last container of baby formula, or maybe find an old bassinet tucked in the attic, but I knew what I was really looking for. answers, or proof. Ilara dozed in the carrier strapped to my chest as I moved through the kitchen opening drawers with slow fingers. The fridge was empty except for a jar of imported fig jam and half a bottle of Prosecco. The cabinets were clean too sterile in that way, only people who don't plan to return leave them. In the bottom drawer beneath the junk mail pile and broken corkscrew, I found a worn green folder labeled Spain. Inside were printed travel itineraries going back 6 months. Flights, apartment lease, and Barcelona international SIM cards already activated. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It was orchestrated. Behind the itineraries was a notarized form. My name, my address. My signature copied from an old lease, I realized. Power of attorney for Ilara Quinn, age 6 months, transferred to me indefinitely. I pressed my thumb to the paper, trying to understand the depth of it. They had made me her legal guardian without ever asking, without a conversation, without even pretending I had a choice. Tucked into the back of the folder was a printed bank statement. The family account dated 2 weeks before they vanished. A withdrawal, $21,600. Destination, Meridian Trust, Private International Division. Not even a U.S. bank. They moved the money offshore. I sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd once hosted faculty dinners, and corrected my posture and stared at the numbers. I should have been furious. I should have wanted to break something, but all I felt was stillness. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trade. They chose freedom, and they offered me Ilara as the excuse. A pan on the counter still had the price tag from a boutique in Portland, $240. They'd left that behind, too. I folded the documents and placed them in my bag. Then I looked around the room one more time, as if expecting to find their voices echoing off the walls. But it was quiet, and the quiet didn't apologize. Back home, I laid Ilara down, opened my laptop, and searched how to file for emergency guardianship in Virginia. I expected the legal aid office to be sterile and overworked. In some ways, it was. The waiting area buzzed with fluorescent lights, and the receptionist barely looked up from her keyboard. But when Ephraim Rhodes stepped into the room, tie slightly crooked sleeves rolled, he greeted me like I was a person, not a case file. That alone nearly broke me. I showed him the documents I'd found, the power of attorney, the bank statement, the printed itineraries. He read through them slowly, tapping the pages once before he spoke. "They didn't notify you?" he asked. "No, they just left." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then this isn't just a guardianship transfer. It's potential financial abandonment, maybe even fraud depending on how the funds were classified." He explained that while the power of attorney was technically legal, the deception around it wasn't. If we could show they intended to offload responsibility without consent or knowingly misused shared funds, we had ground to challenge both the custody arrangement and the money trail. I asked what the process looked like. He said it would be slow, tedious uphill. I said I'd already been up all night for weeks. What's one more climb? That afternoon, I began cataloging everything: receipts, screenshots, Bryony's old texts asking me to help out for the weekend, and my mom's message about the money. I compiled a spreadsheet. I printed copies and labeled them. It felt obsessive, but also like I was building something one page at a time. 2 days later, Bryony finally called. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted her voice on the record. "Danica," she said, her tone clipped. "You agreed to this." "No, I didn't. You said you'd help. For a weekend. Not indefinitely." There was silence on the line, and then a laugh, dry, condescending. "You always dramatize everything." I hit record on my second phone. "You think they abandoned you? Grow up. They're done carrying you." I nearly dropped the phone. I steadied my voice. "They weren't carrying me. They were hiding behind me." "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "It's done. You're not going to scare us with legal threats." I didn't say anything. I let the quiet fill the space. She hung up. I labeled the recording and backed it up twice. That night, Ilara had a mild fever. I held her against my chest, her breath hot and uneven, and watched the ceiling pulse with the streetlight outside. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel vindicated. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The next morning, I called Ephraim and told him I had something he needed to hear. The message came on a Sunday morning, just as I was warming a bottle. We're flying back. We want to see Alara. No apology, no explanation. Just a declaration like they were returning to claim a suitcase they'd forgotten. I didn't reply. 3 days later, they showed up at my door, Sandra, in her expensive scarf Talbot with sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. They looked tan and rested the kind of rested only people without responsibilities ever managed to be. I opened the door just wide enough to let their intentions hit the threshold and stop there. You look tired, Sandra said, brushing past me. Still working that part-time job? Talbot followed, arms crossed, eyes already scanning the apartment. We were surprised you didn't reach out sooner. Thought you'd have questions. But I guess not everyone's cut out for parenting. I didn't answer. I let them talk. Sandra walked to Alara, who was seated in her high chair, gumming a piece of banana. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Her posture's off. You really should be doing tummy time more consistently. I turned to face them fully. I filed for full custody 3 weeks ago. They froze. And I submitted documentation of the bank transfers, the forged power of attorney, and your failure to notify me of intent to leave the country. I also have recorded calls with Bryony confirming I never agreed to long-term guardianship. Talbot's jaw shifted. Danica, there's no need to escalate. Sandra took a step forward. Let's not make this ugly. It's already ugly, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Sandra's expression hardened, her eyes sharp with the kind of cold calculation I'd grown up watching. Talbot sighed, performing disappointment like it was a rehearsed monologue. I think it's best we leave, he muttered. I nodded and opened the door. Sandra turned back as she walked out. You've always had a flair for melodrama. I just didn't think you'd drag a baby into it. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I closed the door gently, turned the lock, and exhaled. Alara dropped her banana on the floor and clapped her hands. That afternoon, Ephraim called to confirm our court date had been moved up. The courtroom smelled like dust and wood polish, and everything felt too bright. Ephraim walked with quiet certainty, holding our binder like it was gospel. I sat beside him, hands folded, watching the judge's eyes more than my parents'. Sandra and Talbot arrived 10 minutes late. Bryony never showed. Ephraim began with the timeline. He presented the notarized documents, the travel plans dated months in advance, the account statements showing the funds drained and transferred offshore. Then he brought out the recordings, Bryony's voice dismissive and cold, confirming I had never agreed to guardianship. He handed the judge a printed transcript. Sandra cleared her throat a few times. Talbot smirked now and then. They didn't deny the evidence. They tried to reframe it. My daughter is prone to exaggeration, Sandra said smoothly. She's under a lot of stress. Caring for a child, especially one that isn't hers, is bound to bring up emotion. The judge didn't blink. I've reviewed the documentation, she said, her voice level. What concerns me is not just the abandonment, but the strategic nature of the transfer. Ms. Quinn was misled and left without support, both financially and emotionally. She paused, looked directly at my parents. I'm granting full legal custody to Ms. Quinn. The offshore account will be frozen pending review. Any visitation from Sandra or Talbot Quinn must be supervised and approved in advance. Sandra opened her mouth. The judge raised a hand. We're done here. Outside, the wind had picked up. Sandra stopped me by the courthouse steps. You were always jealous of Bryony, she said, voice low and sharp. Even as a child. You just waited for a way to punish us for loving her more. I looked at her but said nothing. She turned heels, clicking, Talbot following behind without a word. I walked to the parking lot where Alara was waiting with Mrs. Arliss, who'd come without being asked. The baby giggled when she saw me, arms outstretched. That night, as I rocked her to sleep, I realized I hadn't felt relief. Just an odd, hollow stillness, like the end of a very long echo. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a message from Ephraim marked urgent. The kiln hums quietly now, steady and warm. I keep it running low most mornings while Alara plays on the quilted mat a few feet away. The cradle I built from old pine slats sits near the shelf of finished bowls. She naps there sometimes, fingers curled around a fabric doll Mrs. Arliss stitched by hand. My hands are back in clay. The wheel spins again. I open the studio 2 days a week, 3 when Alara's feeling settled. Orders are slow but steady. The local cafe restocked their mug shelf with my pieces last month, and a college student wants a custom set for her thesis exhibit. I take what I can, and I let the rest go. Mrs. Arliss comes by every Friday with oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. She never stays long, just a check-in and a soft squeeze of my arm before she disappears down the sidewalk. Her presence is its own kind of healing quiet, dependable, the opposite of what I was raised to expect from adults. Sometimes I still wake up expecting a new message, some fresh twist in the saga, but it's been months and the silence has settled into something I can live with. The legal follow-ups are mostly done. The account is still frozen. There's no word from Bryony. I've stopped waiting. Last week, Alara took her first steps between the work table and the door. She fell after the third one, then laughed like it was a game. I laughed too, and then cried alone in the kitchen after she went to sleep, not because I was sad, but because I was the one who saw it. I wrote Bryony a letter yesterday, not out of obligation, just to close a loop. I didn't say much. Alara is safe, I wrote. That's all that matters. I didn't include a return address. This morning, as I opened the studio and set my fingers into the damp clay, I looked at the small cradle beside me, the tiny bowl Ilara had dented with her thumbprint, the faint streaks of flour on the floor from yesterday's toddler baking attempt. I was left behind so they could escape. But I stayed and built something better.